Hi, Judith. Lovely to see
Hi,
you.
Angus. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing really well. This is the first time we've met,
hmm
and I'm really looking forward to the short conversation we're going to have, finding out a little bit more about the work that you've done with regards to chemistry and biology with respect to spiritual science. And questions always pop up once other people start talking. And then towards the end, you're going to be telling the audience a little bit about your conference, what you're going to be talking about at the Mystech Conference that's happening in August. But before that, I'd love it if you gave our audience a little bit of background. So, like, what is it? What have you been doing in life? And perhaps,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, I started out my life on a farm in North Dakota,
Hmm.
um, and interestingly enough, when I was growing up in high school, I wanted to join the Rosicrucians. I didn't exactly know what they were, but they sounded interesting. But my mother said I couldn't. so so there was a little seed there that
Mm.
kind of rested. But I was a kid, one of those nerdy kids that loves science.
Yeah.
And I really didn't quite resonate with being a farmer in North Dakota. So I left and I went to UC Berkeley and I got my bachelor's in chemistry. And then I went from there to Caltech and did my graduate work through candidacy for the PhD. And then didn't complete the thesis, so I'm right there at that in between where I did all the coursework, but I don't quite have the letters.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
And in
so
what field was
that's
that? Was that in biology or
um,
chemistry or something
it
else?
was in biochemistry.
Biochemistry.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I went from chemistry to biochemistry. Um, then uh, after that I came to Ann Arbor and did some. I had a position at Wayne State University and worked on schizophrenia research, where I was looking at the diurnal rhythms and how things synchronized or desynchronized hormonally with schizophrenics as compared to controls, and that was really interesting.
Mm.
I have always been very interested in rhythms. There's something about periodicity that has just captivated me.
Yeah.
But then, biological clocks go off, and I had a couple of kids. And as it turned out, my son led me to the Steiner School by not being able to adapt well to the other kinds of schools. And so when I found the Steiner School, it was like, oh, everything works. He's happy, he's doing well. Everything was good. So
Mm.
I was curious about this school, and from there, I wound up becoming a teacher at that school. There's a lot in between, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. Really, that it was absolutely wonderful teaching chemistry. It's mostly through experiments and sometimes through theater.
Yeah.
Um, and in, after um, after doing that for a bit, my life got interrupted again, and that was that my husband's job disappeared, and we had a choice to either move out of Ann Arbor with our kids being in high school by that time,
Mm.
or start our own company.
Right.
So we elected to start our own company. So for the next 20 years, we ran a high tech fiber optic sensor company where we got a lot of government grants and developed technologies based on light and uh, creating interesting ways of working with light so that
Mm.
it only skimmed a surface and looked only at the surface, but it didn't look at the solution. Um, so, um, I didn't mention that as I discovered anthroposophy, I joined the Anthroposophical Society back in 1995. So been with it for quite a while.
Mhm.
I was absolutely delighted when I found the connection between Rudolf Steiner and the Rosicrucians. I did not know that that was a connection before I found it, but
It's not on the front page, is it?
No, it was very funny though that
Could
echoed
I
right
just go
back.
back to something you said before we start dig into the light aspect and the chemistry aspect? But I'm really interested your own personal perspective on why it worked for your son when the system that he
Oh,
was in originally didn't work.
well, why it worked was because he was very hyperactive,
Hmm.
and in a regular classroom he was expected to sit still, and that just didn't work. Whereas at at this little Steiner school that was just getting started, his teacher didn't mind if he was on the desk instead of in the desk, or doing somersaults in the back of the room, as long as he was, he was with it. He was paying. He would pay attention, and he was participating, but he just had to move about.
Yeah.
And all of the rhythmic movement things made that was his learning style. That really worked. And they didn't insist that he learn to read before the third grade,
Mm.
which he wasn't inclined to do. There was It was quite a funny way in which he finally decided he would read, and that was that his best friend was in the reading group that was doing an interesting book, and
Right.
he was in the it was still in the reading group, which was, the learners reading group, and he wasn't really engaged. And so he said, "Oh, okay, I'm going into that group," and then he proceeded to learn to read. So it's the faith they have, that Steiner schools have, in the rhythm that the child has, their own rhythm.
Yeah.
They don't have to be the into a certain box in a certain way. The teachers learn to look at the student and, communicate with the student's guardian angels,
Mm.
and try to get their lessons working, so that each student in the class has something in the way the thing is delivered that it's able to connect.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Lovely to hear these success stories as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was teaching, the first year I taught, I didn't quite get how to do it. I knew what it did, but I didn't quite get how to do it. And so my first year of teaching, the students tended to not to feel kind of like, "What are you doing?" with all this chemistry. And then it occurred to me that I could turn it into songs and plays. And so once I started doing it as theater, musical theater, then people were engaged and really learned the stuff. But um, doing it just straight wasn't working very well. So you
How
discover
do you turn
that.
chemistry into theatre? It's a wonderful image you're serving up there.
Well, I can. I have on YouTube. I have a video of this was one of the 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 immunology blocks that we
Hmm.
did, the immune system, and you can see the kids doing a pedagogical play. This is not a polished theater play like Steiner, often does. This is a pedagogical play, which is partly in the classroom, partly in the gym,
Yeah.
but it gets the idea of how you deliver the material through
So you got
song
the white blood
and
cells, the
acting.
T cells, and all the different type
Yeah,
of
the immune system really lends itself to that, because
wonderful.
it's easy to get into the personalities of the ones that are attacking, the ones that are
Yep.
sensing, the ones that are, it's a natural.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, if I've got the timeline correct, you worked for a while with teaching chemistry in the school, and then you started your company with fiber optics. Is
Yes,
that
and
correct?
I
Yeah.
continued to teach a block or two
Mhm.
throughout that time, but I wasn't full time anymore.
And so how fiber optics? It sounds like um, archetypal dead science. It sounds like it. But you've obviously found something in there that's not. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we were doing something that's a very interesting thing. Normally, if you have an optical fiber in a solution and you have a bunch of fluorescent labeled, let's say, antibodies, because that's what
Hmm.
we often had, In the solution, you can't tell the difference between what's on the surface and what's in the solution because it's submerged in the solution. So how could
Mhm.
you tell the difference? But it turns out if you inject the light at exactly the critical angle, um, of so that the light can't escape, it
Total
skims
internal
right along the
reflection, or
yeah, it's totally internally reflected, and it's
Mhm.
skimming one. If you think in terms of conventional science, you would say that the magnetic field vector and the electric field vector are separated, and therefore it can't propagate
Right.
because they propagate off of one another, and so it skims along the surface. So that means that you can interrogate the surface fluorescence without seeing what's in the solution, and that lets you see what's happening in real time, which is always the interesting stuff, right?
Hmm.
I mean, because life is always moving. Everything is always moving, if it's alive at all. And if you're working with biological questions, you have things that are heavily related to life. Even if they've found themselves in a test tube, there's much of what life presented to them that still remains. So the curves that I would see would represent what was actually going on, minute, second to
Mm.
second, millisecond to millisecond, and you can get a lot of information out of that, and so we use that to assess things like whether a compound was likely to be an estrogen mimic in
Hmm.
so if you test water, would that water have estrogen mimicking effects, which would be damaging? So you wouldn't want that in your body. So yeah, to do that, we looked at receptors and binding to those receptors, estrogen receptors, and then the activation to transcribe what the instruction from the receptor is. So it was pretty interesting.
And was this all? It's like, was this a new field of science, or were there other ways of like doing that, getting the type of results, but using more?
Well, it was pretty cutting edge. We have
Mhm.
a lot of patents on that.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah, it was quite different from doing Waldorf,
Yeah, but fascinating
but
to
but
be
very
there.
interesting.
Yeah, it does make me think so much of this idea of developing new senses. That it's like we're not talking about clairvoyance or anything here or clairaudience, but this idea of expanding the range of it's like sensory material so that we can
Hmm.
like better understand so like the what otherwise just remains invisible to us. Really.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting uh, things. I've always had a little um, differential agree difference of opinion of a number of anthroposophists and myself, because some of the folks who are pure phenomenologists won't recognize the extension of the senses by machinery,
Right.
um, and so that's regarded as non-phenomenological. But I view it as quite phenomenological. It's just like wearing glasses, except on a bigger,
Mm-hmm.
in a bigger frame. So that's an interesting conversation that I've
Yeah.
had with many people.
Yeah. So, uh, I'm sure I would love to dig deeper into that, but we're going to try and keep this down to around about 15 minutes or so. So, what you've just been telling us about, is this related to what you're going to be presenting at the Mystech Conference, or have you chosen a totally unrelated field?
Um, it isn't totally unrelated. It is biochemistry.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not about trying to detect things with instruments. It's what I'm going to be talking about is how is it that light, we talk about the light ether
Mm-hmm.
in anthroposophy. How is it that light comes into life, which is the life, a different ether, and in between there you have the chemical ether, which is sometimes called the tone ether.
Mm-hmm.
And I puzzled over the fact that it's called the chemical or tone ether for quite some time. And then one day I woke up and I realized that there are 7 active columns in the periodic table, and there are
Mm-hmm.
7 different tones in this the Western scale. And I started playing with it. And so I will be playing biochemical reactions that are key to the transformation of light into life through the photosynthetic reactions in the plant. I'll be going into the how the plant absorbs the light,
Mm-hmm.
what how that involves particular metals that are characteristic and a particular geometry of the chlorophyll molecule, and then I'll look at how that geometry is the same geometry as you find in heme, and yet there's different metal involved with that, and what is the significance of these. So it will sort of go back and forth, or I should make 3 directions, because there will be the scientific, purely just this is how biochemistry works,
Mm-hmm.
and there will be the conversation about the ethers and how things move from one ether to another, and there will be the exercise with the translating all of this into the language of music, so that in the end the music can speak even if you can't grasp the science. So it conveys what needs to be conveyed. So that's what I'm going to be doing.
Oh, so I've got to ask one more follow-up question there. Um, so the work of William Russell has always seemed very interesting to me. I haven't gone deeply into it, but it's yeah. I won't try to describe it because I'll just mince it. But are you? Is that something that you've looked at? The keywords that you're saying is it's like light, and because he did a completely different periodic table.
The
That
one, is
sounds.
that the spiral one that we're
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah, yes, that's right. Yes, the one where he predicted like heavy water way before it was ever produced, conceived.
Mm-hmm. You're the second person who's mentioned that, and I haven't looked at it, and I intend to before the conference. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, this came to me out of just the fact that I am a musician and I am a scientist, and the two kind of, and I am an anthroposophist,
Yeah.
and they just kind of came together in a way that it was sort of a eureka moment when I
Mm,
realized
I can imagine.
there's something characteristic about the substances of life musically. So
Well,
I have to look at this fellow William Russell. I'm interested in whatever he was doing. Is
on
there a
that
title?
cliffhanger, on that cliffhanger, we'll press stop.